We're all tired, and the community at large has work to do together. So, we are all here to talk as adults and young adults. How do we move forward? Welcome and thank you for joining in conversation with Rashmi. Today, I have a well known community leader as my guest with her 14-year-old son, Selam Debs and Jaleel Debs. So, thank you so much. Selam is the owner of Juici Yoga Studios in Waterloo, a yoga meditation leader, a lululemon ambassador, and also she is most passionate about advocating for rights of racialized folks, the upliftment of Black voices, and the importance of educating our community on anti-racism and social justice. Joining is her 14-year-old son, Jaleel Debs, again, a poet, creator, and a speaker, a motivational speaker. So thank you both so much for being a part of this conversation today. It's a pleasure having you both here.
Thank you for having us,
Yes,
Rashmi.
thank you.
So, with everything that's been going on, we've seen so much that's gone on with systemic racism and the police brutality. And you've had, Salam, your own share of, your growing up years. You've had your own challenges. Let's start with what that was like growing up for you.
Yes, so I mean, I grew up in Regent Park and also Scarborough. My Ethiopian parents moved to Canada in 1984, and my mom and my parents, my dad divorced, and so I was raised in Scarborough and in Regent Park with my mother, and we lived in the areas of Toronto that were, considered disenfranchised, that were kind of at the peripheral of society's vision. Nobody was really looking at these communities unless you lived there, unless you were a racialized or poor person that would live in these communities. And, what I remember growing up, which is taking me a long time to unravel, is that police presence was always there. We always had police around us. We always had yellow tape. There was always some type of situation happening in our community. But even when there wasn't a situation happening, police were around, kind of surveilling the experience of feeling like you're constantly being watched. Mm-hmm. And so my relationship to police is, I would say growing up has been really challenging because I know what it feels like to see Black and brown people thrown to the ground, slammed to the ground by police officers with their knees in their back. I too have had the experience when I was in college of being thrown onto a cop car, face down, handcuffed. And, I think when you have those experiences and you also hear how there's a senseless kind of no reason for why it's happening in many moments, I would say that my relationship in those experiences have been really difficult, and it's only been in the last, I would say, 7 years or so that I've been able to unpack that.
Mm-hmm. Racism does exist in Canada to a large extent. So as a mother, having a child growing up with you, what are the challenges you had to face?
Yeah, I think that the idea that racism isn't overt or is only just kind of light racism that they say in Canada, I think is such an incredible, dangerous myth because we understand that Canada was built on the genocide and the taking of Indigenous communities and peoples. We understand that we had 2 centuries of slavery in Canada, and I think for myself, my upbringing and my experiences, my lived experience in most Black and brown people, Indigenous people, is that we have experienced overt styles of racism and also microaggressions on a daily basis. And as a mother, that experience continuously informs the way that I teach my son. There's this balance that I have to find between helping him thrive and find joy and excitement and creativity, and also keeping him safe and helping him be conscious in the world so that he knows what to do when he is confronted by a police officer or a person in power.
And Jaleel, I'm going to ask this to you. With everything that's gone on, do you feel you live in fear?
I would say there has been times where I've been leaving my house even, and I've thought, like, seeing in the news so many killings of Black people, and just kind of my mind, like, what did that happen to me? Like, and I've had those thoughts of being scared to leave my home because for fear of having me being like violence being committed against me because of my race and because I'm Black. And I think that it's even, I know there are a lot of other people who feel that way, a lot of other Black people in Canada who feel that way. And I think that that it has to change. Like Black people shouldn't have to be scared to go outside and just live in general.
And this instance that took place with George Floyd inspired you to also write a poem. So if you could share that with our listeners, that would be great.
Yes. Yeah. We can't breathe, we can't sleep, we can't talk, we can't walk. We can't go outside without risking our lives, without being shot by a cop with a Glock. When will it stop? Police brutality, white cops causing Black fatalities. So many people gone like that, it's becoming a normality. Because these white cops still have that slave owner mentality where they think they can beat us, shoot us, tase us. Who's gonna save us when the police are doing the crime? Tell me why they never end up doing any time. Knee on his neck, so he's squeezing out his life. Floyd will never see his kids, he will never see his wife. They can't stand to see us free. They can't stand to leave us be. After Ahmaud Arbery, do you still wonder why Cap took a knee? I pray to God Floyd's killers go to trial. Check their phones, I bet they have Jim Crow on speed dial. It's time I stop seeing myself in the news. It's time I stop seeing Black people killed by men in blue.
Wow, that's powerful. And it seems like it's from your heart and it's what you feel, right? So how do you feel growing up in a society that treats and looks at people with color differently?
I definitely feel that I do go through racism. I've gone through racism in my life, and I just feel that we have to live in a world where I should be able to even just walk into my school without having to be faced with racism and being called the N-word, being asked for an N-word pass for people to be able to call me the N-word. And I just think that there's so much racism that people don't know that happens. And I think that it has to be, now it's becoming more of a conversation. And I think that's good because it can't just be Black people talking about this. Everybody has to, it's not a Black issue. Everybody has to talk about it to actually create a change.
Absolutely. And today the younger generation needs to feel safe, right? Because you live in fear constantly. And clearly the poem you've written is very powerful of what actually is conspiring. And it's been a history, Selam, for years. And today, finally, it seems like, people are taking that step forward. So you organized the biggest march that, did you even expect there would be over 35,000 people attending that?
Rashmi, honestly, I've been thinking about doing a march for months, and I thought about it happening in July many months ago, and COVID-19 happened, and so in my perspective, I was like, well, I guess we'll have to wait till next year. And then, as the weeks before, just not eating, not sleeping, going through the grief and everything that's been happening with Ahmaud Arbery, with Breonna Taylor, with George Floyd, with Regis, with all of these things happening and the grief around it, I started thinking to myself, and I talked to a friend, Erin Francis, who's one of the organizers, and we said, like, why don't we just do a march? And my famous last words were, if 30 people come, I'm happy. If 30 people come, we're good. And, within 3 days, we had over 35,000 people who marched in Kitchener-Waterloo in Victoria Park, and also over 5,000 people online. So it was beyond what we could have ever believed. It is what I have been dreaming, that this community would one day step up and actually say the words Black Lives Matter and actually start to take actionable steps. It was pretty powerful.
So what did you feel when you saw the kind of response you saw? Because again, did you ever imagine in this community we would have that many people coming out to support you?
I felt a sense of hope for the first time about this community, you know, and it's made me very emotional thinking about it in the last 2 weeks, because we really went from, I felt like people were scared to even talk about anti-Blackness. They were scared to even talk about racism, kind of avoiding it constantly. And I've been doing this work for a long time. And so the fact that it was this overwhelming desire to want to donate, to want to contribute, to want to show up as volunteers. And, the thing is, when we understand that the AQUA, which, community, the ACB network, Waterloo region, Black Lives Matter Waterloo region, all of these grassroots businesses and organizations have been doing this work for so long. And I think what I was grateful for is that this community finally said, we want to step up. We want to talk about anti-Blackness unapologetically. And the fact that they were able to do that during COVID-19 and during social distancing was an even much more powerful message.
What do you think the next steps are?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people are thinking about the march, and although that was an incredible day on June 3rd, really the march means nothing if we don't actually take actionable steps, if there isn't actual tangible changes that we make in the community. And some of the changes that our grassroots organizations have been working on is with the Waterloo District School Board, and looking at the SRO program, and looking at the constant over-policing of schools and our youth, specifically, of course, the areas that are more marginalized and the more racialized schools, and then looking at what people have been scared to talk about, which is defunding the police. But really, defunding the police is not taking monies, not taking all money away from the police, but what it is allocating funds and monies towards health and wellness tools and educators that can actually support our youth and our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities to thrive, and to shift and change. And so that's happening right now. There's petitions and conversations and meetings since the march.
Mm-hmm. And one other important thing I've seen that's come up, and speaking to a few people also, is the importance of educating themselves on Black lives, the history behind it all. So how important is that?
So the education piece is essential. And I think, the reason why it's essential is that we have to understand that we are conditioned. We live in a society that has taught us that whiteness is superiority, and that, and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are inferior. In order for us to understand these systems of racism, it is essential that we start reading and learning and educating ourselves from Black authors and brown authors and Indigenous authors, as well as allies and accomplices that are teaching and educating to help us understand, so that we can prevent doing more harm. The harm comes from the ignorance. It's kind of like, what Martin Luther King says, where he says that, after this, at some point, silence becomes a betrayal. And many people are scared to speak up because they don't know if they're saying the right thing, if they're doing it in the right way. But we understand that then it's necessary to educate oneself so that you can speak up, so that you can join and stand with the people in your community and start to actually change this community for the better.
Any advice you would give any other mom out there who fears to bring a child into this world, or fears having, another episode of this kind? What would you tell them?
I would say that I'm standing with you, and my heart is with you, because I know what it feels like to live with that fear. Not even just the fear of your son or daughter being, murdered by police brutality, but just the constant feeling of them not feeling enough in the world because of the racial, the racial injustices and the microaggressions. What I would say to mothers like myself is continue to pour into your child the knowing that they come from descendants of incredible beauty and countries that beyond systemic racism, have incredible culture and music and history. I think about Ethiopia, and Ethiopia being one of the most ancient countries in the world. And what I do with my son is I feed into him that knowing that he comes from a rich history, he comes from a strong history, he comes from a strong people, and has an ancestry that is here, that he gets to live that out. And so I think, you know, as we feel more safe in the world, as these conversations start to become the normal conversations, may we start to tap into our sense of Black liberation. That self-care is the greatest sense of social justice that you can ever do. That the more that you take care of yourself, the more that you love yourself and your child, and find ways to tune into, you know, those self-care tools, the greater win that you get to have in this world. And so I'm constantly just showing him that his possibilities are endless, and that we will fight no matter what. I will never give up until we start to create this change in our community.
Mm-hmm. And Jaleel, about your mom doing the kind of work she's doing, and you have stood by her every step of the way, you know, from what I'm seeing. How do you feel about that?
I think that she's been my biggest inspiration in life, and especially my biggest teacher when it comes to educating me about things like systemic racism and what I'll have to go through and things like that. And I think it's been awesome to see how all the things she's done, from her course to have been along with the ride for her with that, and see the march go from just an idea to 35,000 people. And it's just amazing to see her doing all of this, and it gives me inspiration to help make a change in my community. And yeah.
Oh,
that's really sweet. And thank you, Selam and Jaleel, for being the change that we need and being a part of this conversation. It's an important conversation, and wishing you guys the very best, and stay safe, stay healthy. And we're all here to support each other and the community at large as well. So thank you again for being a part of this conversation.
thank you, Rashmi, so much for having us on.
Yeah, thank you so much.